Watch how quickly these tiny clumps of Java moss grow in just 100 days. Keep in mind the far left and far right tank also have clumps of pilo moss growing in them, so the middle tank is going to be our best example of how quickly Java moss alone will grow. But man, is it fast. You'll also notice the tank on the far right now has a black backer, and that's because I'm growing out fish fry in there. There's probably 100 plus fish fry in there, and they also love the moss, so this isn't just about shrimp. So after seeing that, do you want moss like this? Well, I can tell you with certainty that your shrimp do. Whether you have Neocaridina or Caridina shrimp, they would benefit greatly from the introduction of moss. The species you're looking at right now is pilo moss, but Java moss works wonders as well. There are a few other notable moss species that you should consider, and I will get into those later in this video. Consider this video your thorough but concise guide to shrimp keeping's closest cure-all. Alright, so let's start with people's favorite, Java moss. Now imagine how much moss we would have if we separated this huge clump into golf ball sized amounts, and then let them grow. It would be ridiculous after a month or two. All of that to say, you can theoretically buy one small portion of moss and then never have to spend money on it ever again. That's what I did, and I'm nearing the point, as you'll see in this video, where I will need to start giving my moss away. It's growing far too quickly, and a lot of my tanks have gotten a little bit out of control. So why do we want moss so badly? And once we have it, how do we actually take care of it? Okay, moss has a ridiculous number of benefits. I could spend all day yapping about it, so I'm going to condense my list into a few main points to avoid making anyone miserable. Okay, so our first condensed point on moss benefits is, it is an amazing source of surface area. Look at it. Try to visualize how much surface area a regular empty 10-gallon aquarium has. Now imagine the amount of surface area present with a big clump of moss. It's truly night and day. Surface area grows beneficial bacteria and biofilm. Biofilm is easily the best food for our shrimp, so naturally we want more surface area. The extra beneficial bacteria also keeps the water clean and prevents ammonia and nitrite buildups. A big clump of moss alone can do some serious legwork in terms of supporting the nitrogen cycle. This alone would be enough to convince me to grow moss.
But wait, there's more!
Wow, thanks Billy Mays, you're right, there is more, and that more is that moss requires nitrates to grow. After the beneficial bacteria converts our ammonia and nitrites into nitrates, our moss gets greedy and slurps it all up. In this way, it helps to create a self-sustaining ecosystem to some degree, as it converts all of our shrimp's waste into more healthy moss, which then increases surface area, which increases filtration, and okay, you get the point. It's good stuff, alright? I'm not lying to you. Alright, so our last point, to keep this brief, is that baby shrimp thrive in the intricate branching structure of moss. They are safe for many fish you may have, and they have access to plenty of biofilm. The moss tendrils do a pretty amazing job of catching any powdered food you may feed, which only adds to the baby shrimp paradise that is your moss ball. If you aren't foaming at the mouth to add some moss to your tank by now, I'm not sure what it's going to take. I've reached the point where I will never set up a shrimp breeding tank without moss. I've seen tanks with it, I've seen tanks without it, and it's not comparable. Notice how in that last section I didn't specify which types of moss these benefits apply to. That's because the benefits are pretty universal, and with all of the various kinds, there's going to be upsides. So, some mosses grow better than others in certain conditions, but in general, the most common aquarium mosses will be a huge positive. Christmas moss, hooker moss, flame moss, Java moss, pilo moss. I would argue these are the most common mosses, with the exception of pilo moss, which you don't come across too often in my experience. So now that the table is set, so to speak, how can we grow these mosses? That's a great question, past me. Now this is the part where endless debate will inevitably begin. Some are going to say that moss is a tremendous pain to grow, and some are going to say that it's so easy it's basically impossible to kill. Well, I have good news for you. I have been in both camps at various points in the last few years, and I have determined that both are true. But I believe I have also determined why some people struggle endlessly to grow moss through my own trial and error. Alright, here's the big reveal. Here's what I have determined. The initial clump of moss that you start with will single-handedly determine your success. This is my experience, at least. I've ordered moss 6 times so far, and 4 of those orders ended in huge mess with dying and brown moss. Why? Well, when I opened up the package, I found moss that didn't do very well in shipping. Unfortunately, I don't have footage of this moss because it was years ago, but I've compiled some photos from online that were very similar to what I found. If you have moss like this, you're fighting an uphill battle. You can read as many guides online as you like and watch as many shrimpologist videos as you like, but you will very likely struggle anyways, even if you give your moss the perfect conditions. I know what you're probably thinking. Where do I get good moss? And once I have that good moss, how do I keep it alive? Alright, so if you can do it, you should definitely get your moss from someone local to you. It will pay dividends in the long run. Shipping tends to be very hard on moss, as it can spend several days or even weeks without access to any light. They're also exposed to lower humidity levels than are optimal as they ship. So, if you can get it at your local fish store or from someone nearby, you really should. It increases your chances of success tenfold. Be wary though of buying cups of moss from local fish stores, as a lot of them were shipped to the store like that, and it's not actually any better than ordering it yourself. Okay, so you just went to the local fish store or a local breeder and you got yourself a nice healthy crop of moss. How do you care for it? Alright, I have experience keeping both Java moss and pilo moss, so I'll be speaking about those. Firstly, you'll need there to be nutrients in the water. Contrary to popular belief, these are not root feeders and they don't need to be attached to anything. You can just drop them in the tank. I've noticed that the more food I feed to my shrimp, the more quickly the moss grows. I personally see no need for fertilizers as long as you're regularly feeding your tanks. The excess food and the shrimp's waste will provide the nutrients needed for your moss to grow big and healthy. I've also had more success growing moss in unheated tanks. These tanks are usually around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the moss absolutely thrives. When it comes to lighting, moss seems to need a fairly low amount of light. In fact, I grew moss in a tank with zero light that was about 12 feet from the nearest window. I was stunned that it not only survived, but it actually slowly grew. It's a much bigger issue to give too much light, as your moss will become overrun with hair algae. Now let's go over some more quick tips about growing moss. If you do end up buying moss from somewhere online, you are very likely buying moss that was grown out of the water. Usually it's grown in plastic tubs on shelves or racks. This matters because that moss has adapted to growing in a high CO2 environment and it's not well acclimated to growing underwater. You will very likely experience at least a few weeks of issues after introducing it into your tank. In some cases, that moss will never recover. Once you internalize this fact and start yourself off with a nice healthy clump that was grown underwater, you will very likely achieve lots of success with very little effort. Now you may notice that in the beginning of this video, the moss I added was in small cups. It's true, that moss was ordered online and was grown out of water. Sometimes it works out just fine, especially if you're very patient. Those tanks were cycling at the time, so I paid very little attention to them. I let that moss sit for months, and 100 days later, it looked amazingly healthy. If you have no other options, you can certainly buy it in this form. I'm just trying to help give you the best chance possible. As you may have seen in my yellow shrimp tank, I'm also growing some Saswassertong, or however you say it. This is a good plant as well, but I haven't been able to grow it nearly as quickly as my Java moss. It's not even close, in fact. It probably grows at like 1/10 of the speed. Why that is, I really couldn't tell you, but either way, it's a very pretty plant and the shrimp seem to love it. I also used to grow a ton of guppy grass in my tanks. It's still in a few of them and the shrimp seem to really love that as well. It has many of the same benefits as moss in that it grows really quickly, consumes nitrates, and provides plenty of surface area. If you aren't careful though, it can overrun your tank completely in just a few weeks, as you'll see on the screen from a short I made a few weeks ago. Now the last honorable mention is Anacris. Now this plant really grows like a weed. It's called common waterweed for a reason. I was foolish enough to bring some of this inside from an outdoor pond, which led to a dragonfly larva invading my first ever shrimp tank and beginning to annihilate them. By the time I realized what was going on, I discovered 3 larvae in there having a feast of my beloved baby shrimp. Safe to say I won't be doing that again, but regardless, Anacris is a fast-growing plant that also provides tons of surface area. It's a very solid choice if you can't get your hands on moss. It can also be planted in the substrate, or it floats, which makes it very versatile. If I can find any footage of my first shrimp tank, I'll put it on the screen right now. Okay, so I actually did find footage of this tank. You can see in the top right, there's some anacris floating there. And there is a clump of comedically dead moss. It's like hilariously dead, so you can see where I'm coming from. You can see how I sort of trial and errored my way to this conclusion. But it is kind of funny to look back at that tank. There was so much wood in that tank, it became a tannin nightmare. But either way, anacris is a good plant that grew to fill the entire tank in like a single month. So there you go. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. My last video was, I think, 7 days ago, and I mentioned I was almost a YouTube partner. I am now a YouTube partner, which I can, you know, it only happened because of all the support, which is amazing. And I look forward to making better and better videos as I learn and become more comfortable. So thanks again for watching. Happy shrimp keeping, everybody.